All right, well, every time I get up and talk, you'll probably learn a little bit more about me. I do this with the kids as well in Discovery Park. I say every time you hear from me, you'll probably learn just a little new piece about my personality or interesting things about me. So last time I was up here on Grad Sunday, I was talking about how I got lost because I thought I knew directions. Well, this time is car related as well. My car is fairly basic. I like my car a lot. I now am sharing it as my almost 18-year-old has his fulls, as they call it, and he's nicknamed it the Mamabile. So my Mamabile car is fairly basic, doesn't have all the fanciest gadgets and gizmos. For instance, I don't know if your car is like mine or like what I consider the fancier car. I don't have a digital countdown to how many kilometers are left in my gas tank. I don't know if that's your case or not, but mine, it just goes ding when I have 1/8 of a tank left, and then the little gas light comes on in the dash, and it's dropped down on the gauge into the red zone, right? So now I'm like, I should probably consider refueling. But this is the part where you're going to get to know a little bit more about me is I like to take my car to the limits. I do. It is not uncommon. I hear it go ding, and I ignore it completely. And I feel really confident about continuing to operate in this way because I have never, ever, 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 I'm jinxing myself now, but I have never run out of gas. So before working full-time here at the church, I was commuting daily to Halifax, and I was in a carpool. And so when it was my turn to drive in the carpool, my carpool friends, they considered me quite reckless because they thought it would be really normal to fill your tank up before you drive a carload of people to and from Halifax, because you never know what's going to happen, construction on the 102 or whatever. And I'd be driving them along, I'm the driver, and they're sitting, and they hear my car go ding, and they start panicking because they know I didn't care how much gas was in my car. Well, people have limits too. Some people are more cautious. Even though I do this with my car, I would consider myself to be a bit of a cautious person. Other people, you can probably think of them, are a bit more reckless. Well, about 6 months ago, I ran 1 lap around the TAC grounds track, and I was proud of myself, but that was my limit because I thought I would die. Other people run entire marathons, and to me, that seems quite reckless. So where do you draw the line? At what point have you reached your limit? At what point are you just gonna call it quits and say, that's enough? Well, today we're gonna look at a short passage in the book of Mark. The book of Mark is known to be the oldest account of what was written about Jesus' time on earth. It's also the shortest of the gospel books, gospels being Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament, and they're what's written about Jesus' life on earth. I like short books, so I like Mark. He's a concise writer. He doesn't sort of add all the extra stuff. When I'm writing, when I was in university, I used to have to try to figure out how to make my essays longer because I was like, Mark, I'm concise. I told you what's happening. That's what happened. So anyway, we're going to be in the book of Mark today. Well, over the centuries, we've come to learn more detail. So Mark was really concise. He told us exactly what's what. He uses the word immediately a lot. We were here and then immediately we went there. And it's just to the point. But over the centuries, we've learned more about some of the details of Jesus' time. It helps us put things into context, and that is important. It's not fluff. You have to add these things so you can picture what stuff was like. Things like what I find interesting, they've learned that kids, they used to play games very similar to hopscotch and jacks. That's cool to me. I think that's neat. There was a board game, much like checkers, that was popular among the adults. Like, that's cool stuff. It helps me picture what were the times like when I'm reading the Bible. What was stuff like back then? So archaeologists have also been able to excavate. If you watch like the History Channel or watch it online, they're excavating these old buildings. So in our passage today, it takes place at a home in Capernaum. And so they've been able to excavate a synagogue in Capernaum and some homes in that town. That's interesting to me. So based on history and archaeology and other authors, we know things like many of the homes were made of mud bricks, rough stone foundations, or pounded dirt floors. The rooftops, you've probably seen this in photos, were often flat and might be used almost like a second room, like another story up there. And the roofs, they tried to use limited amounts of wood, but might have had some wood beams covered in straw and then some clay. So it's fairly sturdy up on the roof, especially people might sleep up there when it's hot in the summer. Like last night, I might have considered sleeping on my roof, but it's not flat, I'd roll off. So it would also be common that a big house, 2 rooms in total, like that's the entire house, 2 rooms. No designated bedroom. Your bed, unlike today's beds, just a mat. You roll it out where you need to, you sleep on it. Next day you roll it back up and you put it away because there's no specific bedroom. It actually sounds a lot like the houses that we recently saw in El Salvador. A big house, standing room only, people standing close together, maybe would fit 50 people. That would be a pretty big house in Capernaum at that time. So keep all that in mind, and we are going to read our passage today, starting at Mark chapter 2, verse 1. And it says, "When Jesus returned to Capernaum several days later, the news spread quickly that he was back home." Well, we know if we had read starting at the beginning of Mark, so Mark chapter 1, we know that Jesus had been in Capernaum, he was teaching in the synagogue, he was healing people, and then he and the disciples left and they went to Galilee and did the same thing. He performed miracles, he was teaching. Now they're returning to Capernaum, which is a town at that time of about 1,500 people. So picture it, there's a flurry of activity. Jesus is coming back to town. Stories are probably floating around about what his time had been like in Galilee. But there's no social media. You can't just tweet it. Hey, we saw this happen just now in Galilee. Now Jesus is on his way to you. That's the miracle worker. So it's word of mouth. And, sometimes stuff could get exaggerated or distorted. And so maybe not 100% sure what's what, but there's this message going around that this guy, he's different. It is notable that Jesus wasn't the only one preaching in synagogues or performing miracles. At the time, there were false prophets spreading messages. There were religious leaders teaching as usual in the temple. It was widely believed that gods and miracle workers performed healings and other miracles. So it could have been just like, hey, this is another guy doing similar stuff that we've seen before. The people aren't in the know yet. They don't know that Jesus is God's son. And we know this as well from earlier in Mark. Mark chapter 1, verse 32 and 32 to 34. It says, "That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was." So at this time, the people, the general folks around town, did not realize that this is God's son. Even if people weren't really sure who he was, we do know that there was something different, though. Yes, other people were preaching and teaching and performing maybe some healings, we're not really sure. But there was definitely something different about Jesus, even if they didn't clue in, this is God's son. So if we read Mark 1, verses 27 and 28, it says, "The people were all amazed that they asked each other, 'What is this? A new teaching? And with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him.' News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee." So here we have him. He was in Capernaum. He went to Galilee. He's back in Capernaum. News has spread that, there's something a bit different about this guy, but we don't know exactly who he is. So let's continue. We started with Mark chapter 2, verse 1. Let's pick up there again. So I had said, When Jesus returned to Capernaum several days later, the news spread quickly that he was back home. Soon the house where he was staying was so packed with visitors that there was no more room, even outside the door. While he was preaching God's word to them, 4 men arrived carrying a paralyzed man on a mat. Remember, your mat is your bed, so literally carrying him on his bed. They couldn't bring him to Jesus because of the crowd. So, what seems to be the logical ending of these verses? They couldn't bring him to Jesus because of the crowd. So, forget if you've ever read the rest of the verses before. Just think about, put yourself in the situation. What's logical here? So, I guess they should call it a day and go home. So, maybe it'll work out tomorrow instead. These 4 guys were just taking a chance anyway. Maybe it was just rumors that Jesus can heal people. Maybe he's not as special as they say. Why would Jesus bother with us anyhow? Have they reached their limit? They tried it, it didn't work, maybe it's time to call it quits. They ran, like me, the 1 lap and thought, that's enough, I'm not doing the marathon. Well, I'm a mom of teenagers, and I work with teenagers. As you may have noticed, if you interact with teenagers, they have kind of a different vocabulary than some of us older adults. For instance, I call money, money. Some teenagers call money cheddar. I'm not joking. If you haven't heard that, that's a thing. That is what teenagers are calling money nowadays. Well, there's an online dictionary where people like me can go to decipher what in the world are these teenagers saying to me. Sometimes my son will text me a word and I don't know what he's calling me, so I look it up in this slang dictionary. So if you go to dictionary.com under slang, you'll find a definition for this phrase. Turned down for what? This phrase became popular because of a song, and I am not at all suggesting that you need to go and listen to it, but it was from a decade ago. It was called Turned Down for What? And that phrase literally is now in dictionary.com under slang. And it means there is no good reason to stop. That's what it means. Okay, so if you learn that and then you go talk to some teenagers, they may be like, hey, you know what I'm saying. So turned down for what equals there is no good reason to stop. What if these 4 guys carrying the paralyzed man on his mat in need of Jesus got as far as the edge of the crowd and decided to turn down, decided to stop, decided to give up? What if that had been the case? If I were in their shoes, the shoes of these 4 guys, carrying this paralyzed man on a mat, trying to see Jesus, who may or may not actually be able to perform miracles. I don't know if this is in summertime, but if it is and it's Palestine and it's like, oh my goodness, we're carrying this guy. We have to go up, the road and try to get through the crowd, whatever the case is. I can't even see into the house, can't see where Jesus is in there. I think that might be my limit. That might be where I say, I don't know about this anymore. Even if there's something different about Jesus, even if he can heal people, I don't know, guys. Should we keep trying? So let me pose the question in this teenagery slang. For what would you turn down? For what do I turn down? So the translation would be, what might make me stop? Where do I stop? What's my limit? I think for me, it's hard to put myself back in the shoes of these guys, but that might be my limit. So turn down for what? There is no good reason to stop. For what would you turn down? What might make you stop? Well, we have the benefit nowadays of reading these accounts of Jesus, of his time here on earth. We know that he is the Son of God. He's given us the gift of the Holy Spirit. These things didn't exist quite yet at the time of Mark chapter 2. So, do you think that you would pursue further? Or would that be your limit? Do you think you'd stay and make your way through the crowd without having any certainty or knowledge that Jesus can help you? It's hard. That's a hard one. It's hard to remove what we know from our minds for a second. Well, as an individual, even though we know what we know that Jesus is God. Jesus is God's Son, and he does perform miracles, and he does heal. Even though we know that, still, there are times, even today, when we're in need of Jesus in our life, in a particular moment, during a difficult season. And we feel like there's an obstacle preventing us from getting into the room where he is. We know he can help us, but we feel like there's that obstacle of actually getting ourselves before him. So for what have you turned down? Getting into the room with Jesus. The translation to that would be, what has stopped you from getting yourself before Jesus? What are some of those obstacles? I sat and thought about my own, which is hard. It's because it's kind of admitting that I put up obstacles to letting myself be in front of Jesus sometimes. So I thought about that. I want closeness with Jesus. I need to be in the room with him. But stopping me are things like busyness. Busyness. I'm busy. They train you. They say, don't call yourself busy. Say that your schedule is full. It just sounds better. That's what people tell me. Don't say you're busy. Say your schedule is full. But still, I let busyness stop me sometimes from being in the room with Jesus. Technology. Maybe this is, some of us more than others. Scrolling on your phone, thinking that it's important to look these things up that you didn't know before and you really needed to know them. A lack of self-control to make the time. Sometimes it's like, I shouldn't have to schedule my time with Jesus. It should just happen naturally. No, I need self-control to not devote things to certain items in my schedule and make sure I actually schedule my time with Jesus. Pride. I think one of my professors at university said, pride is the root of all evil. So when I think of pride, it's thinking that I can accomplish things on my own. I know how to prepare for VBS. I don't need to pray about it every day. I can do that. No, I need to be in the room with Jesus. Pride prevents me from being there. Doubt. Maybe he doesn't really care about this particular struggle. I can just handle it on my own. He doesn't have time for that. Maybe a lack of faith. I, in my mind, don't see how it could work out any better. I can see the ending. It's not going to get better than this. Why would I be in the room with Jesus trying to figure it out? My lack of faith. So those are my personal ones as I reflected to write this for you today. So for what have you turned down getting into the room with Jesus? Now, what about corporately as the church? This passage talks about 4 guys, and they're helping out someone in need. They're trying to get him before Jesus. These 4 guys are trying to get this one man in need into the room with Jesus so that he can help the man out. So corporately as the church, this particular church, but the church as in Christians as a whole as well, sure, we recognize people need help. We want to pick people up. We want to carry them to a better place, but it's hard and there are obstacles. So for what do we turn down? As Christians, what stops us from helping others in their moments of greatest need? For what have we turned down? What has stopped us from helping others? Here's just a few. It's not easy, right? Kind of like that mind, the lack of faith. I can't see how this is going to turn out, So I don't know that I should bother talking about it with Jesus because I don't see a clear path. This doesn't make sense to me. It's not easy and it's complicated. Maybe we don't have enough resources. There's limitations. Even though I didn't believe that my car had limitations, we all know cars run on gas or fuel of some sort, or electricity nowadays. But there's limitations. If you don't have the fuel or the diesel or the electricity, your car will stop. We know we have limitations. There are only so many minutes of the day. We cannot extend that. There are only so many hands. How do we create more people to come and help? There's only so much money to go around. So where do we draw the line? At what point have we reached the limit and we're not sure if we should go a little farther or try a little harder or trust a little more? So what if we asked these 4 guys who are carrying this man on the mat, realizing there is no room. There is no room. That is not an option. There's no room to get before Jesus. It's not even a question of how to pry through them. It's impossible. What if we asked them, for what would you turn down? What would stop you? So let's pick up where we were reading. Verse 4 said, they couldn't bring him, not possible, before Jesus because of the crowd. So they dug a hole through the roof above his head. They lowered the man on his mat right down in front of Jesus. Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralyzed man, my child, your sins are forgiven. For what would you turn down if we asked these guys? Nothing is what they would say. Nothing. There is nothing that is going to stop us from getting the paralyzed man in front of Jesus today. Nothing. Hey guys, didn't you notice all of the challenges, all of the barriers of being able to see Jesus today in the house of Capernaum? Oh yes, we saw those challenges, absolutely, but they didn't stop us. Turned down for what? That is what they would say. Nothing will stop us. Who healed him? Jesus. But what healed him? Faith. Turned down for what? Remember, that means there is no reason to stop. There is no reason to stop having faith in Jesus. The 4 guys had faith. They didn't actually know for sure that Jesus was the Son of God, but there was something about him. They had faith that he could help them. Because of it, Jesus gave the paralyzed man something that he didn't even know he needed: forgiveness of his sins. And still, Jesus also healed him physically by verse 11. Sometimes we just need to go for it. We just need to be like those guys, just go for it. Turn down for what? Means there's no reason to stop pursuing time in front of Jesus. Have faith in Jesus. We now know that he is the Son of God. He's powerful, he's just, he's mighty, he can provide for you even with the things that you don't even know that you need. We don't have the situational obstacles of trying to get in the crowded room with Jesus. He is already here in every room that we are in. We've created some obstacles for ourselves in our own lives, but have faith, because none of them are too big to break down. None of them can actually prevent us from being in the room with Jesus. Thinking collectively as well, as the church again, because as you recall, it's 4 guys helping out this one man. We can learn from this as a church, as Christians. The faith of those 4 guys is what healed the paralyzed man. It's that sort of faith that seems limitless. You might call it reckless in a way, the good reckless. You know the song Reckless Love of Jesus? It just doesn't care about limits. Jesus goes beyond limits. He doesn't have a stopping point where it's time to call it quits. It's okay for us to have that type of faith in him. We can have that reckless, limitless faith. We've created obstacles that don't exist for Jesus. There was no stopping those guys. And as the church, we can learn for that. We can say, let's go for it. There's no reason to stop. Let's get ourselves in front of Jesus with loads of faith. He's the healer. He's the redeemer. He's the one with all the great ideas. He's the one who knows how we can go about helping others. We just need to get ourselves in front of him and be used to bring healing to the brokenness in our family, in our community, in the world. So we want to be like those guys, digging a hole in the roof and not believing that there are any limitations to what can be done to get in front of Jesus. So let me ask you if you need to be in front of Jesus today. And what would you turn down? Remember, I know it sounds like the opposite, but that translates to say, what would stop you? Do you need to be in front of Jesus today? What is stopping you? Let the answer be nothing. Nothing is stopping you because he's already here. There's no obstacle that can prevent you from being in the room with him.